Hey gang, welcome back to the channel. I've been a little busy lately with my interviews, and I've got a good friend of mine who I've known since the 80s back with us on this channel. You know, when Ringo Starr gives a concert and he's about to do Yellow Submarine and he says, "If you don't know this song, you're in the wrong place." Well, if you don't know who Charles Rosenay is, you're in the wrong place right here on this channel. He's had a long history of doing all kinds of work on the Beatles, dating all the way back to his own Beatles fanzine, Good Day Sunshine, for which he was the editor. And I was a writer for a while for the magazine, as was my future wife, much longer with her for the
Yeah,
magazine. And he's put on loads of Beatle conventions in the New England area, trips to England since when did it start? I never remember the year.
1983.
Okay. Oh, you're so good at plugging yourself. Oh, have you been practicing that?
Never did that before.
So, Charles is here to talk about a number of events that he has in the works right now. And also, he put out a book recently, the top 10 list of, what was it called? The top 10 Beatles
Book of
list.
Top 10 Beatles lists. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Far,
And we can
far be
talk
it
a
for me
little
to
bit.
not have it handy upon
Okay.
request. Yeah.
I think it's everywhere you go. Somehow it's glued to you, that book, but we'll talk about that as well. But I also thought that since he's had this incredibly long history of doing all this work and he's met so many people and interviewed a lot of people, I'd ask him who he has found to be the most interesting of all of them. And I've got a few names, very historical names in Beatle history that I'm going to throw at him, and I'd be curious to know what he has to say about all of them. But
Cool.
anyway, the first thing I want to bring up is the Fab Four Music Festival, which is
Yes.
coming up this month
So
in
excited.
Connecticut. And it's May the 17th, is it?
Saturday, May 17th, doors open at noon. Haven't done a show in a while, a few years past, and good relations with this amazing, cool venue in Windsor, Connecticut. It's the Dudleytown Brewing, and we do a brewing company, and we do paranormal events there and psychic fairs and all that.
Hmm.
My other world. And when they said, "Well, do you have any other things you could bring here?" And I'm like, what about a music festival, focused on the Beatles and the 60s and all that? And they said, yes, bring it. But, we want you to charge as little as possible. So as many people as can come as possible,
Uh-huh.
which better for them. I get it now, thinking back in retrospect, because it's more people who will eat in their restaurant, more people who will have some IPs and ales. But that's fine. I'd rather have 1,000 people pay $10 than 500 people pay $20. So this is cool. Uh,
Hmm.
10 $10 to get in, and it's a whole day of music and vendors and social activities. In the old days, we used to do the conventions, and even you and I we'd break our brains trying to think what guests we could bring.
Uh-huh.
Who hasn't been at a show? You can't anymore. Either everyone's passed or been used. So the concentration is away from the guests. It's a de-emphasis on, the merch and the commercial aspect. And it's just 8 bands rocking out under hopefully suburban blue skies, and we'll have a great time.
I can think of plenty of people as guests that you can invite. I wouldn't say that it's true. A lot of people have passed away, unfortunately. But there are a lot of people who haven't turned up at Beatle conventions through the years. But
We should have a separate discussion on that.
okay,
Yeah,
I will do that with
yeah,
you, if
please.
you want to.
Cool.
Um, yeah. Okay, but you have 8 acts that will be performing.
Yes.
And the great thing, and I know I've said this before since I've co-emceed the show with you before,
Right.
is that there's so much variety in the show. There's so many different ways of presenting Beatles music. You could
Yeah.
have four guys in a band dressed up in jeans and t-shirts. You could have them dress up like, Beatles suits, what
Mhm.
you always call boots and suits.
And suits.
And you could have an old girl band. You could have a duo. You could have one person on acoustic guitar. There's
Yes.
so many different ways of presenting Beatles music, and that gives way to so many different arrangements of Beatles songs too. Sometimes you have a heavy metal version of a Beatles song or a heavy metal band.
Hmm.
And that's what I love about these particular festivals that you put together. And
Yeah.
all these bands come from the New England area, and
Yes.
you can pick up on them and find
East
out
Coast.
more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
East Coast anyway. We have Pat Horgan coming in, and his is a combination of the Bronx, Staten Island, upstate New York, New Jersey. But they're not doing Beatles. They're doing an all stone set, which is something we've added for this set. You mentioned how all the bands really vary it up, and I love that you point that out because I actually ask them to send their set lists in advance, and I make sure that there's no songs repeated the entire day.
right.
Excuse me, my
That's
allergies.
okay. That's how excited you are about this festival. You
I
just
was holding that in.
right.
Yeah, so even the bands that are doing all Beatles, let them do solo stuff, right? Let them do cavern days, let them do psychedelic, whatever they want, as long as there's no repeats. And that came about because I would go to Liverpool every summer on the Beatles tour, and the bands would always end with Twist and Shout. And that made sense in the clubs because they wanted people to dance, but I didn't want that at a festival. So that's always been kind of my thing, is making sure they don't repeat. And with two bands doing no Beatles at all, one band you mentioned, we don't have an all gal band, we don't have any solo players, but we have an all instrumental band,
Hmm.
which is doing all rock versions of Beatles songs and they're from Massachusetts, called While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
Hmm.
Um, One band is doing all monkeys, they're by popular demand. We're bringing back Zilch because they
I've
go
seen
over.
them. They're terrific.
Pat Horgan, I mentioned, is doing Stones.
Yeah.
And my kind of high energy band, kind of the level of Black Ties, younger, more of a let's get everyone up and dancing and jumping around, and Mach Show type band is the 34s. It's the lead singer of the Hoffners, the McCartney from the Hoffners,
Okay.
his normal rock band that is doing an all Beatles set for the show. So that should be fun. So there's half the bands right there.
Yeah. Well, you always keep it interesting, and that's what I like about it. As I've gotten older, I used to be when I was a kid, I didn't care about hearing cover versions of Beatles songs
Yeah.
because nothing can compare to the Beatles versions. And I still feel, my favorite versions of Beatles songs are the Beatles' own recordings of their songs, but I've grown to love cover versions and hearing different interpretations of Beatles songs.
Yes.
You take a song that you're used to hearing with electric instruments and it's all acoustic and it has a whole different feel to it, for example. So you go to one of your shows like this and you get a feel for all these different versions of Beatles songs,
Mm.
different arrangements, and I love that. It
Yeah.
shows how durable the catalog is.
And it's a build up. So the first few acts, even though I think some of them have been at my show before, are going to be more unplugged acoustic, and then it's going to like build up to a higher crescendo as it goes. So the Beatles Forever band from Hartford, Double the Dial, who usually rock out, and I
Yeah.
forget who the third one is. So they're my opening three, and I said this is we're gonna it's outdoors, it's a Saturday afternoon. There's fields of people playing ball all around. Let's build up to the higher energy rock and stuff. So it's a
Hmm.
little different in that we're transitioning, and it should be great. The whole vibe is so different than the conventions we used to do. It's different than Beatle Fest. It's more like Abbey Road on the River, like some of the parts of Liverpool where it's all bands doing festival stuff. It's like Beatles on the Beach.
Okay.
A lot of the events have really geared towards just the great vibe of the great music. And that's what Fab Four Music Festival is. Now, having said that, we're still going to have vendors,
Hmm.
still have authors. I'll be there with a slew of tables and everything from 50-cent buttons to rare albums. We have some great authors. We have Michael Ventrella,
Oh,
Beatle.
sure. I've interviewed him here on the channel.
Bill Last will be doing a launch of his new book, the
Yes.
videography book. And who else? Who else? Um, Oh, well, Tony Renzoni. I don't know if you know Tony, but he's
No.
an expert on the Connecticut rock and roll scene. He's done a book on Connecticut rock and roll artists. He's done a book on Connecticut rock and roll venues, and he's just recently done it on Rock and Roll Radio of Connecticut, the old stations that, well, you're in New York, but we would listen to Super CO, WWCO in Waterbury, WAVZ in New Haven, WCDQ oldies, WNHC Boss Radio. So those were just my area AM ones. When I moved here, I could no longer listen to WMCA and WINS and the Good Guys and
Uh-huh.
WABC. So it shifted to the AM radio of here. So he covers all those, plus how they transitioned into FM rock and roll stations. And he'll be there signing copies of his book. And I'll be there with book of top 10 Beatle lists. So, 4 or 5 special guest authors will be there. Also, Steve Wilson, who represents Ruth and Angie McCartney, and he's got a line of rock and roll books, and he'll be there too. So half the vendors, kind of like it is at Beatlefest now, are the authors.
Okay. Sounds like a lot of fun, and we're going to provide for everybody watching in the description box a link if you want to get tickets online or any information about the Fab Four Music Festival. And I'm glad to see it coming back because it's been a few years. When was the last one?
2022, I think. Simsbury Meadows, and before that, Ansonia, Connecticut. See, we've been jumping around different
Yeah,
times. It was up to me. The first ones were in Danbury. We called them Danbury
right.
Fields Forever, and that
That's a
was a
great name.
real nice setting. Thank you. I love that name. Danbury Fields Forever made sense. Somehow it was jinxed though. Out of the 5 or 6 years we did it, only 1 year did it not rain.
Uh-huh.
And fortunately, we've had it since then, and it's been beautiful. My favorite place was probably the Oakdale Theater
Oh, yeah.
because we were indoors and outdoors, so I got to double the acts. We had 20 bands that time. I think you MC the outside, I MC the inside,
Right.
and we brought in Black Rabbit, and that
Yes.
that was really special. Fifth Estate, who had a hit with Ding Dong, The Witch is Dead, did a whole Beatles set. So there's a lot of great memories, and I'm thinking back now as we're talking. Even though we de-emphasize the special guests, we kind of had some cool people. We had Hilton Valentine, who
Right.
passed. He was the lead guitarist in the Animals. Gene Cornish from the
Mhm.
Rascals, and we had Carl Green from the
Um,
Herman's Hermits, who's never done a convention since and never did before then. He just happened to be in Long Island or be in the area, and I invited him, and he came. So that was kind of cool. If we have one of those, I'm going to jump all over it. Maybe a Billy J or somebody can come by. But
and you
again,
had the guy from Steam.
oh, we sure did. And Jeffrey and I sang backup for that. It was
Uh-huh.
the guy, if people don't know, Gary DiCarlo, who wrote and co-wrote and sang the lead on "Na Na Hey Hey Kiss 'Em Goodbye." Hey, it's a great story, and I think you know this already. But when I did the Beatles' 50th anniversary in New York, NYC
Uh-huh.
Fab 50, we had a band called Club de Beatles from Brazil.
Okay.
They play Liverpool a lot, so
Okay.
I knew them. And it was, if you remember, 4 nights. One night was the Apollo Theater, was all these R&B greats. Another night was the Hudson Theater, rock and roll. Another night was Town Hall, and when we had Al Jardine and Tommy James, go on, superstars. Well, the one night that we did in the Bitter End, I believe it was a nightclub event, and it was only cover bands from overseas.
Huh.
And it was so great. We had a Japanese Beatle band, and we had this Kiss lookalike band from Italy that did Beatles songs in Kiss style. It was hysterical.
Huh.
But one band that week was this Brazilian band, and when they play "Hey Jude," they hand out big placards to the audience. They give out 50 at every show, and it says "Na Na."
Right.
So when they sing, the Hey Jude part of Na Na Na,
Right.
everyone is holding these placards. When the show was over, I collected all the placards. And when Gary DiCarlo sang Na Na, Hey Hey, Kissing Goodbye, all of a sudden, everyone in the front row, which was all he could see, the first 5 rows, were held up Nana, and it just affected him. He said that was probably his best moment on stage, and he's passed. We've lost Gary. I'm actually
Yeah.
working with a guy, Joe, out of Massachusetts, to put out a proper biography on the guy who wrote the song, who sang the song, and didn't get credit for it until he was in his 60s.
Hmm.
to get royalties till so many years later. So anyway, that's a special moment. And I don't know if I ever interviewed Gary DiCarlo, but I know I certainly brought him to libraries and brought him to a lot of events. And he was just such a great guy. And he was a sweetheart. He lived next, one town over from me.
Right. You know that the whole story about Nana Hey Hey being a B-side originally. It was not supposed to be the hit.
Right.
There should be a book, if there hasn't been one already, of songs that were just B-sides that became the hits.
That would be a great book. I'd want to read that. And when I brought him to the first convention was I think 2009, 2010, when we were still doing 1 day or 2 day conventions in Stamford. And he was there with maybe Peter Tork, Tommy Rowe. He said, why would I be there? And I go, there's a very good reason. Your song knocked the Beatles out of #1. He goes, well, that's a bad thing. People will hate me for that. I go, no. They won't. It'll be a fun little bit of trivia, and it's my excuse to bring you there. And I brought him to a Monkees convention. He says, "What's the excuse for this?" I go, "Well, you were on that PBS special with Davy Jones." Oh yeah, I guess I was. So I would find ways to incorporate him into a lot of stuff. So thank you for mentioning him and reminding me that he was at one of the festivals.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for bringing Tommy Rowe because I hadn't no, I did see him once before that a long time ago live, but he had really retired. And he
Yes,
was smart enough to own the music publishing of his songs, so he didn't have to go out and work. But you brought him back and he did a great set
great set.
at one of your
Yeah,
fests, and he sounded exactly the same
amazing.
without really going out touring.
And you know what the hook was to get him back? He had just had a grandchild in Westchester, and
Yeah.
Stanford was close enough. And I said, if I could accommodate the timing and everything else, well, he's not officially coming out of retirement, but he'll do the show.
Uh-huh.
Thanks to Stuart Hirsch, who introduced me, and he loved it, and he went back into the business because of it.
Hmm. That's great.
Yeah.
So Fab Four Music Festival again, it's May 17th.
Yes.
What's the location again?
It's at the Dudleytown Brewing Company, a really beautiful new gigantic brewery, a venue in Windsor, Connecticut. People who don't know the area, it's going towards Massachusetts, but it's near the airport, near Windsor Locks.
Did you ever think about making the festival all indoors?
Yeah, but then it's not a festival. I think that's the biggest delineation for making a convention is indoors,
Yeah.
festival outdoors.
Okay. I'm only saying that because of the bad luck you had before with the
Yeah,
rain.
well, let's
So,
fingers crossed. I already put in a requisition for May 17th to not to be too hot. Don't forget, whenever we did it in the past, it was always July.
yeah.
So it was either the scorching or it rained a few times in the early days. But hopefully we'll be good in a few weeks. It'll be beautiful weather and everyone will have a great time. And we're getting great response. People coming from all over the East Coast. So there should be something for everyone there. May 17th, Dudleytown Brewery, Windsor, Connecticut, and the website I think you're including, but to make it simple, Fab4, the number 4, fab4musicfestival.com.
Okay. Let's talk about your trips to England and what you have in store this time out, because you've been doing it every single year, the end of August.
Yeah,
And it lasts, is it 9 days now or
9 nights, 10 days. We skipped a year or two there during COVID,
yeah.
came back strong. Every year people say, well, people come back, as you know.
Hmm.
And why do they come back? Yes, we're going to go to Abbey Road. We'll see Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, the Cavern, all the staples but Cavern City Tours, who I work with, they're the land package people. They're the ones who own the Cavern, produce Beetle Week.
Hmm.
Beetle Week is always different. Like last year, there was a huge festival on the grounds of where the Brighton Ballroom, New Brighton,
Yeah.
that of where Sam Leach used to book all the shows. You know, Brian Epstein's goal was to get the Beatles a recording contract, but while he was doing that, he was booking them like crazy. He was getting them all over, Merseyside. Sam Leach, but prior to that, where he's getting him into these really cool venues. Brighton was one of those places. So we did a whole festival where people bust out to this area where the Beatles played in the original stage nearby and all that. This year, a similar festival is being held in Port Pleasant, where the location of Hume Hall, the very first place Ringo played with the Beatles.
Okay.
The whole city was built, for the people who worked for Port Pleasant. It was a whole company. It was a very unique area where the people who lived there were part of Palmolive, whatever the that business is. And anyway, so it's very green, very lush. It's not how you picture, Liverpool or a metropolitan city. It's more like countryside, and we're having a festival there. So people who say, well, what's different? That's different. Every night there's different concerts. So people who've been there before who are returning get to experience. But the important things that we go for, going inside John's home, inside Paul's home, doing Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields. Now we're going inside Strawberry Fields, the former orphanage. It's a whole museum. It's open to the public.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
the Casbah is now B&B. It's places where people can stay, and they're actual suites there. So as we're getting older, so is Liverpool in terms of Beatles attractions, in terms of Beatles activities, and Beatle Week. It's just the ultimate. If you're listening and you're watching and you've never been to Liverpool, you're insane. You've got to go before it's too late, while we're still healthy, while we can still walk, while we can still appreciate, and then remember what we're doing. Do it. I can't, if you don't go with me in August and you don't go during Beatle Week, just go. It's the ultimate of everything. And thank you for mentioning liverpooltours.com, because I've been doing it a long time, and it brings me a lot of satisfaction. People who say, oh, you must get tired of going to these same places over and over. And Ken, I don't, because when I see the faces of people going for the first time,
Hmm.
going to a Beatles statue and just losing it and wanting to take pictures of everything, that
Yeah.
it brings me back to my first time, and I get joy out of their joy.
I
So
can
it's
relate to that because every time I go and I see Paul or Ringo in concert, part of my joy is seeing parents taking their kids and watching them see Paul McCartney. There you go.
yeah,
For the first time, or Ringo for the first time. And so, it's more than just the music. It's the whole
oh,
experience of taking everything in. But when you say John Lennon's home, do you mean Mendips or do you mean
Mendips,
the
yeah,
house with Julia, where you lived with
yeah.
Julia for a while?
No, going inside Mendips, we
Okay.
go inside Menlove Ave. That's part of the Beatles National Trust. So if someone goes to Liverpool, they can book it on their own. We just include it. Everything's included. Someone doesn't pay extra for the convention. They don't pay extra for the concerts at night. They don't pay. That's all part of a set package. They can do it. They can just go for 2 days if they want. And I'll
Right.
take care of them, because I'm the US ambassador and representative of the Beatle Week and Cavern City Tours. So I'll arrange whatever people want. But the ultimate, I think, and people agree, because that's what most of the people do, is going on the entire what we call Magical History Tour. We start in London, 3 days, 2 nights, cover everything. Go en route to Liverpool and stop in Henley, George
Hmm.
Harrison's home. We visit Friar Park. We go to the Angel, the pub where he played. We visit the church across the street where Dusty Springfield was buried. We go to all the locations in Henley that had anything to do with George Harrison. He saved the movie theater, and that's right up the street from where we are. So we take in an entire afternoon in Henley, and that's a quaint village. Where people who were seeing London, they're seeing Liverpool. That's like going and seeing New York and Boston, or New York and Philly. They're
Mm.
not seeing, the actual villages or the hamlets of England. And so we include that, and we go to Henley, because we've just finished London, where we've seen every Beatles site, we've seen where they recorded on the rooftop, everything, plus Big Ben, Westminster Abbey, Tower, all the
Mhm.
historic sites. Because I'm always thinking this might be the only time these people are ever going to England.
Right.
And if so, I think it's important to include the historic places of London. So that's always the first thing we do. And we go to Chiswick Park. And there people are like, why are we here? And then we show them the videos of Rain and Paperback Writer. And it just
Uh-huh.
come together so beautifully. And then we spend a whole week in Liverpool, and people say, a whole week? What can you do over a whole week? And I say, can spend 2 weeks and not cover everything. It's become a real comprehensive tour where we fit in as much as possible. But there's no way to fit in every little nook and cranny like some of the places in the world or outside of Merseyside, outside of Liverpool proper that the Beatles played or they went to school or they grew up. We do, if someone goes to Liverpool and maybe they take a tour or a cruise, so they have a day in Liverpool and they say, Charles, what do I do in a day? Say, all right, well, you got to go to the cavern and you
Uh-huh.
look at Strawberry Fields. You got to go to the homes and maybe a museum if you have the time. Well, there's three museums that you got to go to. There's the Pete Best Family's, Liverpool Beatles Museum, which is probably, if someone says, yeah, it's the best museum in the world, that's a given. It's the best museum, period, not just Beatles museum. It's the best museum I've ever been to in my life. It's multiple floors of endless memorabilia with great stories and stuff like how did they get this? It's amazing. Then it's the Liverpool Story, which
Right.
is official, exhibition that's a walkthrough. You walk through the decades of the Beatles. You walk through every era of their existence, and that's very special. But the Liverpool Museum, which is the history of Liverpool itself with the ships and war and everything else, has an amazing Beatles and Mersey music exhibit. So if you have time, you want to do all these things. You sometimes can't get to it in a week. So when people are doing that cruise line trip and they get one day off in Liverpool and they try to squeeze it in,
Yeah.
yeah, go for the highlights, but it's endless.
I know you can't go in the homes. Do you go in front of George and Ringo's early homes?
Yeah, we used to get into one of Ringo's homes because the gal who lived in there, Margaret, bless her soul, she lived there until she was probably 120. She's a huge Elvis fan, so she understood the passion that the Beatle fans had, and she would let people in. We would remember from year to year and bring her an Elvis piece of memorabilia, something to make her happy, and she would welcome people into her home. But George's home, no, I think there's one of them. One of the homes might be a B&B because there's
It
people.
is.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Sutcliffe, I think one of his homes is a B&B. So I understand that, that makes sense. And if you're going on your own and you're spending a week, maybe you spend a night at the Casbah, spend a night in Georgia. If this is possible, you can't do it during Beatle week because
Uh-huh.
everything's sold out. Um, but we go inside John's home. We go inside Paul's home. We do not go inside George or Ringo's. We visit them though.
Okay. What about Marylebone, if I'm pronouncing it right, Station?
Marylebone Station, yeah.
Yeah. Do you go there?
Oh, of course we do, and we try to reenact the scene
Oh,
with
okay.
running. And what we got to always pick one person. As we're getting older, it's harder to pick one person to take the George fall down. I won't do it anymore. I've scuffed up
Uh-huh.
too many pants. But we always recreate that, and we go inside and see all the station parts. And if someone's like really close friends with me, and we have the time, I'll take them upstairs into the private offices where there's actual full-sized photos of the film. So
Hmm.
you can see the photos and then see the actual, places where they actually filmed them. So yeah, Marylebone Station is a must. And that's not far from Baker Street, which is the Apple offices where they had the Apple boutique.
Right.
So much stuff. If you're and if you're a historian and there's no time, but you want to go into Madame Tussauds, which is on the same block. You want to go into the Beatles store, which is on the same block. You want to do all the who's the famous inspector and Watson? What's his name? Because that's
Yeah.
Baker
Sherlock
Street.
Holmes.
Thank you. Sherlock Holmes is infamous for, Scotland Yard and for Baker Street. So that block alone, right near Marylebone Station, is packed. And you go a few blocks past that, and it's where John Lennon was busted, his home that Jimi Hendrix lived in. And then the Peter Asher home where Paul wrote on the top floor yesterday. It's all in the same area. And that day, we don't always take a coach because there's little streets you got to maneuver through, and we want to go to the city bars, which is part of where the Beatles in Help, the scene in the club where they fly out the windows and the
Oh, yeah,
time,
yeah. Uh-huh.
all that. So we go there, we go where Ringo with this boy and was filmed. I go on and on and on and on and on. I get excited just thinking of all the places. But year to
Doesn't the jewelry store still exist?
the jewelry store still exists, and we always try to pawn something there. The pub where he throws the darts and hits the
Yeah.
birds, that's still there. And that has a back room now that they've opened up for groups. Um, so all these places I'm mentioning, we try to fit in as many as possible. If I have a group that's been there before, a lot of people, so then I'll mix it up and we'll try to go to a few different places. Like last year, we had a completely new tour guide. He was in the rock and roll scene at the time. So he took us to a lot of places that Paul would go see Stevie Wonder the first time he was in London,
Mm,
and club we'd never been to before. And it was like, wow, amazing. And it was still open and all that. So we used a guy named Renee Van Harlem from
right.
editor of Beatles Unlimited for 20 for decades. Richard Porter was before that. And the idea was Renee, his dream, his goal was to get to a new place that Charles never was. So the year before we lost him, he passed away. We created Mad Day Out. He took us to all the locations of the photo shoot from Mad Day Out, and yeah, we skipped other places because we had to go to that. But it was worth it for myself and for the people who'd been there before, never thinking we'd get to see these places where the Beatles, Paul with his shirt off, John with his colorful, ridiculous outfits.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I never tell the people in advance all the places we go to. I just tell them it's the most comprehensive London sightseeing and then the most comprehensive Liverpool sightseeing. Okay, before when I said, if you get off the boat, the cruise, and you got a day in Liverpool, or you're coming spending a week in London, you got that one day in Liverpool. Some people will squeeze in time to do a magical mystery tour on a yellow bus, which
Mm,
gets all around. They never get off, but they go to all the sites. That's 3 hours. That's the max. When we do the coach tour, it starts at 9 in the morning. It doesn't end until 6 or 7 at night.
uh-huh.
It's literally 8 times as many sites. And we get off and take pictures and go inside. It's just the ultimate. I can't encourage people more. People say, "Oh, I've been to every convention. I've read every book." If you haven't been to Liverpool and you haven't gone on a tour and you haven't really soaked all of it in, you're really missing out. That's the ultimate.
All right. I know I say this to every year, but I'm going to try and make it this year. A lot has to do with my wife. You're a good friend of yours, and her health, and she will
Yeah,
have a lot of trouble walking. So, we'll see if we can fix that solution,
yeah.
you know.
That's why I don't want to say I beg people, but I encourage to try to do it while you can walk around, while you still can, while you still have all your marbles and can appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is it out of the question these days to visit inside Abbey Road now? Is it very costly? I shouldn't have asked that question.
It's
But
ridiculously costly. When I have a group of, 50, 80, 100 people, I find a way to do it. You're not allowed to as fans. It just doesn't open to fans.
right.
So, we book recording time, and it's astronomical. And we would book a producer and an arranger and a
Mm.
mixer. And when we have a group that large, we can include that. Now, when we do that, talking about 3 hours, we have to get a band in there prior to lay down the tracks, which we then sing over.
Uh-huh.
And the last time we were there a few years ago was very special, I'll tell you, because the band laid down, there was a Mexican band, so we got the Mexican group in first, Mexican Beatle fans, then us, and they laid down the music for Hey Jude, which was great because we did the Nanas. They laid down the music for In My Life because they wanted a recording of it, and then I got to pick one song, and I picked the Quarrymen song, Help Me.
In
That
spite of all the danger?
in spite of all the danger.
Uh-huh.
Why did I want that? Because the group could do the that one part,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
So it was the Hey Jude the Mexicans wanted, and we did the Nanas Forever. It was that, and then In My Life, and we had enough time to do vocals on all three. I arranged it with the people. I was out there, encouraging to sing loud, pointing to people. And Bob Jackson, who's I guess kind of the last remaining Badfinger guy, who
He's
you
my last.
who
What?
you just interviewed,
Yes.
was our special guest at Abbey Road. He came to be part of our recording session, and he had the greatest time. Him and I became close friends. There's a chapter, he put a chapter in my Beatles book, and
Okay.
Bob's a sweetheart. And I was so glad to see that you did an interview with him recently, and
Yesterday.
I'm glad he was my opening act because you had him there. You have me today.
That's really ironic. I just interviewed him yesterday, and he is a sweetheart. Such a sweet guy.
Coincidental. It's not ironic. It's
Yeah.
coincidental.
Okay. All right.
Edit that out. Yeah, I know.
Anyway, so next, I think what we'll do is talk about some of the people that you've met along the years, many of whom, unfortunately, we've lost.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know people that really stick out in your mind as being the most interesting. Before I do that, I want to make
Yeah.
sure I don't forget to ask you this question. You're not expecting this. But many years ago, Bill King, the editor of Beatle Fan, put out hardcover books of Beatle Fan and
Uh-huh.
kept the issues out there in
Yeah.
print from Pierian Press. It was
Oh,
published by them.
yes.
Would you ever consider doing the same thing with Good Day Sunshine? Because a lot of people grew up with the magazine, and those that didn't would love to go back and look at all these old magazines and find out what the news was at the time and what reviews you put out, all that other stuff. Would you ever consider doing that?
I get asked that a lot.
Really?
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. And it's mostly people like yourself who had a strong, connection with the magazine, either because they were writers or they subscribed to it, or, you know, um, just that everyone loved Good Day Sunshine, and I'm really proud of it. I'd rather do a new book. I'd rather do something I haven't done. If somebody wanted to take all the, original sheets of paper and put out a book, I think I would be open to it if somebody else wanted to put it out. I don't
Okay.
want I don't want that job. I'm always right now I'm juggling 4 books that I'm working on and editing another. So to add that to it, I don't know. I was going to do a second volume of the Beatles, top 10 list, of a second volume of the horror top 10 list, and I've shelved those because the other books are, I think, need to be put out really soon, and I want to put them out. I don't know if I'm running out of time. I want to be putting things out, within a few years of each, and being able to come on your show and promote the next thing. And
Okay.
I love doing the books, Ken, and I'll tell you why. When Good Day Sunshine came out, it was a task. It took a lot out of me, and my mom would and my dad would sit and address the envelopes with me. And as you know, in my old Edgewood Avenue home, we would staple each issue, and it got to the point 5,000 issues. There was no computers. We were hand mailing 5,000. It was insane. And then sending Tower Records their allotment, and it went on forever. When we finished the magazine, we literally had it came out 6 times a year. Literally had 3 days to rest, and then I would start on the next issue. So I'm doing that, plus the conventions, plus DJing every weekend. That
Uh-huh.
of things I did, that was the hardest. And when my folks got, sicker, that's when I kind of gave up Good Day Sunshine, which was at the same time that the internet was coming in. I thought Good Day Sunshine would actually continue. There was a new person who got involved, and unfortunately, he wasn't at the time it wasn't the right mix. He wasn't ready to continue it, or couldn't for health reasons, whatever the case may be. So it would be nice if GDS was out there in book form. When I finished Good Day Sunshine, I vowed I would never, because people would always say, "How come you haven't put out a book?" I vowed I would never put out a book. I was putting out 6 books a year
Hmm.
with Good Day Sunshine for
Yeah.
almost 20 years. I said, I've done enough books, but I'm actually loving the whole book experience. I love going to libraries and doing my whole talk on these books and going to presentations and conventions. So it's been a nice second, third, fourth act, whatever it is. And so I love the books. Good Day Sunshine. There should be a Good Day Sunshine compendium. The more people tell me and the more I think about it. But it's something I would love someone else to do and let them take whatever credit they want and profits they want. It should be out there. You're right. It's not something I'm going to do.
Okay, so anybody watching, you want to keep those old issues out there? I only ask because it's such a big part of your history that I know you're extremely proud of.
Yes.
You know, it shouldn't just be buried in the past. It should always be out there for people to read, you know.
I love when people say, "Oh, I just got your book." I have every issue of GDS still in my attic. It's, I get it. I mean, I got boxes and boxes of my comic books when I was a kid. So I
Uh-huh.
also have that box of, GDS from one till it ended. So if someone wants to do that, give me a call or email me or get in touch with Ken and we'll make it happen.
Okay. All right, let's find out some of the people in your career that you have found to be the most interesting. You have a list of your own, so why don't we do those first?
Now let's do what you think, because you hinted that there were some historic people that
Yeah.
I did, yeah, and that I'd love to comment on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Most of these people are from the early part of the Beatles' careers, but what would you have to say about Alan Williams?
He brings a smile to my face.
Yeah.
Alan and I were very close, and he was such a character. And we knew if he drank too much, he'd be cursing. He may not go on stage, whatever. He used to drink way too much. Thank God he lived as long as he did. But we were very close. He couldn't wait to come to America and hang out with my parents. There was one time, who did I tell this to recently? He was over the house. Mike Strito was over the house. My mom comes out of the bathroom, and goes, "Oh, the bathroom is not working." And Alan Williams rolls up his sleeves and says, "Let me at it." We fixed our toilet on Edgewood Avenue, New Haven. But he did a lot of my earliest conventions, and it was because Mike Strito, bless his soul, went to Liverpool before I was doing these tours, and Alan was the one who took him around. Alan was his tour guide.
Uh-huh.
So, we brought Alan over many times for conventions, as you know, a great place in my heart, for a man who was very, cheap with his dollars. He would always, if he saw me in England, come in, he'd buy chocolates and send them home to my mom, and I would bring him stuff too. But that was wow. For Alan to do that, that meant a lot. Always a place in my heart. Loved Alan Williams. The two similar people, Alan Williams and Sam Leach, will always have a real place in my heart. And Bill Harry, who calls them the three cool catalysts, not three cool cats, three cool
Uh-huh. Yeah.
catalysts, where he took himself out of the equation, and it was Alan Williams, Sam Leach, and Bob Wooler. Those were
Right.
the three that Bill Harry would always tip his hat to.
Did Alan, you certainly get the impression that he was bitter that the Beatles didn't give him enough credit through the years. Did he share a lot of that with you?
Shared a lot of it with me, and he shared a lot of it on stage. We would always bring him on stage to talk about it and open things to the audience. And if the audience was asking a stupid question, he would tell them. He'd say, "Shut up, you d-head." He would like he would yell at the audience. It was so funny. Yeah, he was, and he didn't really have a right to be bitter. The word manager is a very glorified term. He was their booking agent. He got them as many gigs as possible. He was not in a position to get them a record contract, to
Right.
manage their careers. It was a club owner, and he took them and he did great things with them and got them to Hamburg and did all the things he did. And he was vital in their early years, and he was vital to the whole history of the Beatles, but not as the manager of all time, obviously.
Right. You think he was fair in calling him, the man who gave the Beatles away?
It's a great title. He put out little mugs with his face on it, and it was the mug that gave the Beatles away. Yeah, yeah, that's a fair, it's fair. He gave them away. He said, "I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole, whatever. I'm done
Right.
with them. I don't trust them anymore." And, he lived to regret that because he could have probably stayed on at some capacity and made a commission. And he could have been, like Mal was, or he could have been like, Alistair. He could have stayed in the family.
Right.
Person who didn't get enough credit as a manager was Mona Best. more than anybody else, she got them, to do stuff and got them bookings and booked them into the Casbah. She was the one with the most foresight. But Alan, yeah, he's the man who gave the Beatles away, period.
Well, you know what Mark Lewison has said?
Tell me.
No, he said without Alan Williams, the Beatles wouldn't have gone to Hamburg. Without Hamburg, you wouldn't have had the Beatles.
And you can say that about every inch of the way.
Yeah,
Right? Without Ringo, the Fab Four might not have been what they were. They might have, they might not have. Paul and John and George would have been no matter what. But without Mona booking them to the Casbah, without just everything. But Alan was a big yes. He was a big clog because he got them to Hamburg and got them back to Hamburg and did whatever he needed to. Drove them in the van where they had to go with Lord Colbine. What's his Lord Wolf?
yeah, Woodbine.
Woodbine, thank you. Um, the thing about him, he's a character. He was a larger than life. He could have been from the Bronx. He was just, that Liverpool. That's what I love. Ken, I love that about Liverpool when I went there, is the characters. Everyone was like that. Everyone was the salt of the earth. They all had a story. There was no BS. It was like cut to the chase. They'd insult you if it was like they were all like my mom. They
Right.
would insult you if they needed to. You know that if they called you a certain word, they liked you. So yeah, very much. I loved Alan. I just found a picture of his I didn't even know I had with him, and it brought back a lot of memories.
All right, since you mentioned him, he wasn't on my list, but why not? Sam Leach.
Sam probably was not as important a figure in the Beatles' history. He booked them into so many places and booked them with Little Richard and all that. But they loved him, unlike Alan, who was on the outs.
Hmm.
And when Sam Leach, when Paul toured again, it's Sam who first introduced me to McCartney, because they were still friends and still close. The problem with Sam is he begged me to come. I love telling this story, to a Beatles convention. In those days, I was drawing thousands of people. And I said, Sam, I would love to bring you, but not a lot of people know you. Not a lot of people will understand you when you talk. Because he was the heavy Scouse Liverpool accent,
Yeah,
but he had a speech impediment.
right.
So between those two, so I said, I put him off. I kept putting him off. And I said, well, Sam, if you ever put out a book, I'll bring you over. And of course, follow the Mersey Beat Road. He puts out a book. And so I say, he goes, don't worry, I'll make it up to you. If Paul ever tours again, I'll bring you on backstage with me. So
Uh-huh.
the best thing I ever did was bring him on a convention, but I was really smart because I was able to understand him. And I knew with a microphone, nobody would. When I interviewed him, I just repeated his answers. I just translated it to the crowd.
Uh-huh.
Sam and I were very, very close. In fact, he owned a string of beauty parlors, barber shops in England. That was his vocation. And when he stopped doing promotions and stopped doing music, I said, I want my hair blonde, and no one in America will do it because they say my eyebrows are too dark, my beard's too dark, and this was just right before Eminem and right before the rest of the world caught on to blonde hair. He says,
Uh,
well, you come into my shop, I'll have my best person make you blonde. And it was on a Beatles tour, that in the middle of a tour, that I became a blonde and never looked back.
I didn't know that's how it started, but there you
Sam,
go. You were ahead of your time.
I'm giving you exclusives. Charles Rosenay exclusives that nobody else cares about.
I said Eminem copied you, is really what happened. All right. You also mentioned Bob Wooler. Did you know
Yeah.
him well?
We had a mutual respect because he knew I was a DJ.
Uh-huh.
He said that when he DJ'd the Cavern, he did radio too. He loved nothing more than having a crowd in front of him. And Ken, that's been my thing. You're radio. No one can do radio like you. You're amazing. And you've been able to catapult that into podcasting and interviewing on stage and doing all those things. Could care less about radio. I could care. I love being in front of a crowd, and you've seen
Right.
me entertaining in so many levels of that. But Bob was the same. Give him 50 people or 50,000 people, and he would, command them with his microphone. And he was quippy, and I love that he had puns galore, and they best of sellers, Cell, things would just pour out of his brain, and he was brilliant, and we had a mutual respect, and he would love to talk into those old-fashioned microphones, you know,
Uh-huh.
the and so I found one once as a lapel pin, and I gave it to him. He wore it every day of his life, you know, till he
Oh,
passed. Bob would we'd write back and forth letters. He would, you know, encourage me for Good Day Sunshine, and he was a sweetheart to me. And you know, there were certain things that I think people never wanted to bring up with him, the Lennon fight and all those things. And I once said, you know, if there's anything you ever want me to never discuss, please let me know. He goes, Charles, it's these one-offs. I don't want to tell them, but if you ever want to hear anything or know anything, or there's something that there's a question about, you know, come to me and I'll tell you the true story.
mm.
Bob was one in a million. And when he got together with Alan, oh my God, they would drink themselves under the table and they would get nasty to each other. And you'd think a fist fight would break out, and then they walked off stage, you know, arm in arm. They put on a show. They were great.
Man, I wish I could have seen a film of that. Okay. Since you've had trips, part of your trips to England, sometimes you've taken fans over to Hamburg.
Yeah,
So I thought I'd bring up Horst Fascher.
Horst Fasher. Great guy. You know, he was more proud of the fact that he was a friend of the Beatles.
Uh-huh.
You know, he goes, anyone could have been their bodyguard. Anybody could have helped them in this club and that club. Well, Horst was great. We'd come over to Hamburg, and, you know, he couldn't wait to meet the fans and show them the Indra and the top 10 and, you know, where the Star Club was, you know, and all that. He was a very great guy. And I think it was very historic because he had never come over to the States, and he came over to be on stage with Pete Best and talk about Hamburg at one of the shows. We got so close that his daughter was getting married in Manchester the same time we were over for a Beatles tour. And he said, "You're going to have to take off half a day." I go, "I can't leave my group." He goes, "Not even for my daughter's wedding." And so it wasn't his daughter's wedding. I misunderstood because the German was so broken up. He was marrying Farron's from Farron Flamingo's daughter, who was half his age in
Oh,
Manchester. So it was his wedding. So yeah, I went. I went with a few friends. I went with Stacy Eisenberg and with Danny Levine, and we went to his actual wedding. So
that's funny.
yeah, I was close with
It,
Horst as well.
it's funny that you just misinterpreted what it was. And
I thought his daughter was marrying someone. It was his actual marriage, and it was I would never believed who he was marrying because I knew the gal. She was a beautiful girl, and she was a rock and roller's daughter. You know, Farron from Farron Flamingos. They're a very,
right.
very big time Mersey beat band.
Okay. Um, Actually, I'll bring this guy up because I met my wife at a Beatles get together in the Catskills.
Yes.
Billy J was there, and so was Tony Sheridan. So I
Yeah.
got to interview Tony. This is in 91, 1991.
91.
But that interview is on my website, by the way, with Tony Sheridan. But
Wow.
how well did you get to know Tony?
Well, I'll tell you that I brought up that weekend with Billy J
Uh,
recently, and he remembered it. And he remembered that he played one night and Tony Sheridan played the other night, and that was the first time he had met him. And he was in I don't know how many years, and they, you know, really bonded. I'll tell you my memory of Tony Sheridan. Tony, I would ask him to play certain songs, and he'd say, I'm gonna play this." I said, "Oh, you can play that, but you got to play my Bonnie." "All right. Well, I only played this version of my Bonnie." There would always be a back and forth. And then he'd get on stage and you couldn't get him off stage and he'd play whatever, you know, everyone wanted. And Tony's, my memory, which will blow your mind, is sitting in the Catskills. And I was at the dinner table with him because that was a very unique event. We did the
yeah.
Beatle Weekend Getaways. We'd go swimming with the stars. We'd play softball. They would perform at night, but we'd hang out. We'd have dinners with them. And he was having soup, and he turns to me and he goes, "Wow, this might be the best chicken matzo ball soup I've had since my bubby made it." And you could have wiped me off the floor. And he said, "No other questions." And that was and he walked away. that was the mind blower of that weekend for me. Tony Sheridan was great. He'd come over to the States a few times, but we always tried to go over to Hamburg and make sure that we got him to do a gig. There was one year that the group A Hard Night's Day from Dallas, Texas, were
Uh-huh.
on tour. You know how some years groups go with us and do the touring with us. So they were his opening act, and he was supposed to do acoustic, and I think he actually did some songs with them too. So I have a lot of good memories of Tony. You're mentioning people who are just making me smile so much, and I wish they were still with us. They were so important to all these tours and so important to the Beatles' history.
Yeah, I remember that weekend because my future stepson, Jeffrey,
Yeah,
was then 13,
yeah,
and he's a brilliant musician. He plays so many different instruments, and really he's if you had to pick an instrument that he's the best at, he's a really great drummer. And
hmm.
he went and drummed behind Tony Sheridan.
At 13
And
years of
Tony
age.
didn't bother to tell anybody what he was going to do. He just winged everything. Everything was all improvised.
Right.
And Jeffrey's playing along with all this 50 stuff. But I mean, some of the songs he probably didn't know.
Wow.
But what a highlight that was for him to be that young and to back up Tony Sheridan. And actually, now that I think of it, might have been the last convention you did, the one with Denny Lane.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jeffrey was also he drummed behind Denny Lane with Mike
Wow.
Miller and
Yeah.
the Paul McCartney band One Sweet Dream. So
So nice.
Jeffrey's had a lot of great experiences through you.
Even when he was younger, he would do the sound alike contests or the lip sync contest, and I'd get him the biggest applause, and then I'd give him a kick in the ass off the way on the way off the stage because I felt close enough to do that. Yeah, great history with Jeffrey.
Yeah. But you kind of never knew with Tony Sheridan what he was going to play. I got
Oh,
the feeling he was a lot like Chuck Berry, who would go from town to town and just grab musicians locally and not rehearse at all.
they
You
follow my
know.
lead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very true.
All right. One of the conventions that I was at, and I remember being on a panel, was with Cynthia Lennon. So
Yeah.
what do you remember about Cynthia?
So many great things. I loved Cynthia so much, and she was so good to me. I mean, what comes to mind when I think of Cynthia is how pure and how what a good soul. And we lost her so way too young. And she confided in me a few things that I've never shared about the family. But I'll tell you a funny story was the first time I brought her, and we've met. And a lot of these people I meet at Liverpool, or I'll meet in London, or I'll meet on the Beatle tour, and we become friends in a few
Uh-huh.
days. Say, well, you got to come over to the States and come to one of my conventions, and it was always a yes. My goal for that one convention, it was Stamford, Connecticut, and my advertising campaign was together again for the first time, Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison. Are you
So you
following?
had you tried to get Louise, I guess,
Cynthia.
and Cynthia.
We had Angie McCartney.
Okay.
We had a Lennon and McCartney, and we were supposed to have Louise Harrison, but she decided not to be at my show. And I think you kind of know the reason why. It wasn't very nice. For someone who vowed that everything she did was to raise money and everything she did was for the fans, not so much. And I shouldn't talk about someone who's passed. So we're gonna just share that we were at a Beatles convention in Liverpool, and a band played, and they either played Power to the People or something a little more revolutionary. And when it was over, she said, "You hear that, America? Stop the bombs now." What? So that was a little weird. Louise, when I try to reconnect with her many years later and tell her that I had a book of top 10 Beatle lists coming out, her response was, "Oh, you're still alive?" So that was, weird stuff with Louise. But she kind of, that would have been, I thought, a brilliant promo. McCartney, Harrison, and Lennon at one convention for the first time ever, together again for the first time, whatever, however I was going to word it. But we had a McCartney, we had a Lennon, we had May Pang, we had Fred Seaman, we had Joey Molland. I think the lineup was still star-studded enough without Louise.
Okay. You know who else you had at that convention? I hope I'm remembering this. It was Norman Rossington.
That I don't know if it was that one, but it might have been. I think it was a different year because we had all the BBC people one year, if you recall.
Yeah.
And I think that year, maybe Davy Jones was our non-Beatle guest, and everyone said you can't have a non-Beatle at a Beatles. Well, he was at Sullivan when the Beatles were there. He's been, there's so many connections, and since then, obviously,
Right.
Mickey and Peter, everyone's been at Beatle conventions since then. But yeah, so Norm Rossington. Was that the only convention he'd ever done? I think maybe I don't know.
Well,
Maybe
in the US probably, because I don't remember him being at Beatlefest. I could be
um,
wrong, but I
Norm
don't
was
think he
Norm
was.
was great, and he was an old pro because he'd come from the British cabaret circuit, so
Yeah.
he could be funny. He could do anything, and he loved the Beatles connection because he was in the film. But he loved reuniting with Davy. He knew Davy. They knew each other. There's a
Huh.
famous picture of them hugging. But Norm Rossington, I didn't get to very close with. I don't even remember interviewing him on stage. Did you interview him?
I interviewed him, but I got to go back and listen to it because, you do so many interviews in your life and you don't remember, and very often you don't go back to them.
Sure, sure. No,
But I
what?
interviewed him and I interviewed John Junkin pretty close in time.
Oh, wow.
And I think you were mentioning the BBC. I interviewed Bernie Andrews. Was
Yes,
he at your convention?
was.
Okay,
Was
so that's where that was through you, probably.
Shirley Jones. There was like three or four BBC people that year. I loved when I got exclusives. Now Mark Lapidus and I are on good terms. And he gave me a really beautiful welcome this past Beatle Fest. So I actually say Beatle Fest. There were many years where I wouldn't even use the name, and him and I weren't on great terms. But probably in the back of my mind, there was always that, oh, I got to get a guest that Beatle Fest never had.
Uh-huh.
It was always something that I would strive to get that one special person. So when it comes to Norm Rossington, I think I was really proud that he was at a convention, and the people like a Sam Leach and Alf Bicknell. I was happy that I had them first, because that was always in my brain. Beetlefest was not a competition. They were the be all. They were the big one. I was this little dot in Connecticut, and Beetlefest was L.A. and New York and Chicago and very huge.
Hmm.
And I was so for me to get a guest that might not have been at that show ever, or to have gotten him first was always something I tried to get. Yeah.
You got Black Rabbit first. All right. So, those are the people I came up with. So I want to know the ones on your list that you found to be the most interesting.
So mine are not necessarily for Beatle historic reasons, or maybe my own personal reasons. Like I always think of Richie Havens, who was at one of my shows in New Haven in the early 80s, I guess. And we were then becoming a real recognized convention. And he contacted me about a week before the convention, and his agency said, well, he'd put out a cover album of Beatles stuff where he'd done all Beatle covers, and could he come to the convention? And I said, yes. What would you like him to do? I go, well, sell as many copies of his record as he brings. And I think he only brought 25. It was crazy. But would you like him to go on stage? And I go, yeah, definitely. All right, well, he probably can go on for 10 minutes. You can ask him a few questions. I go, great. And I was doing all the emceeing and all the convention interviewing in those days. And it was, for me, relatively easy to do Alan Williams or people who I knew so much about. Well, I didn't have time to prep. I just brought him on stage. We spoke for an hour.
Uh-huh.
He had a guitar behind his chair, and I go, "Is that there for a reason?" And he goes, "Well, if we finish talking, I can play some music." And he played, and he was just unbelievable, and the crowd went crazy. And I guess he had connections with New Haven or Connecticut. He sold out his albums, obviously, and hopefully sold a lot more because of the event. But what I learned then, Ken, is I know you do a lot of preparation and you're much more professional than I am, but I like to wing it. I like to do it the Larry King way, where you think you're asking the questions that the audience might ask them,
Right.
dumb, maybe dumb it down. And I had never done an actual interview with a celebrity outside of the Beatles circle, which I knew but like the back of my hand.
Hmm.
I knew what did I know about Richie Havens, Woodstock, not much else. And with that, I was able to ask him an hour's worth of questions, and I was really proud. So he'll always be in my heart as a special person because of that. Okay, I can do this kind of thing as an interviewer. And I really love that he contacted us. Could he please appear? And he was just so humble and so sweet. Anyone who ever knew Richie Havens would know how gracious and wonderful he really was. So
Yeah.
he's the first one that comes to mind when you ask about, a guest that I was maybe proud of or whatever, was special for a certain reason.
Right.
Yeah,
I met Richie briefly because my wife Joanne set
yeah.
up a concert at Yale University to raise money they have like a fame type school.
Mhm.
So he volunteered to do
Yes.
it. And because of him, it sold out the concert.
Wow.
And I didn't get to know him, but my wife did talk to him a
Yeah.
bit, and he was phenomenal. He
Yeah.
had such a style that was unlike anybody else with the open string guitar, the way he played everything, and his
And
arrangements were so different.
yeah, yeah, so true.
And
If you're
apart from
listening,
that one album, he did a
yeah,
lot of Beatle covers.
always to be the closest. If you're listening, people, and you have to be, otherwise you wouldn't hear this. Check out Richie Havens stuff. You'll be surprised at how different and how unique and how just from the heart and great stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
I
He
don't
had a
remember.
big hit with Here Comes the Sun, which went top 20. Again, very different arrangement to it. So, who else?
We gotta say Pete Best because he put kind of
Hmm.
put me on the map, and I brought him back so many times to so many conventions, Detroit and Cleveland and Philadelphia. We were friends. Pete, I need you at a convention. Okay, when and where? We got very, very close. Christmas cards exchanging, him and his family and myself, and it's continues to this day. Um, he would always give me the, oh no, really? I would always ask him about what he called the thing, and that
Oh,
was
God.
that
Yes.
was the famous Hamburg thing that I don't want to give it away. Listen to an interview with Pete. And it's funny because a few years ago, Rogue, his brother, interviewed him at the Liverpool Beatles Museum. And the interview was literally over. Okay, we only have time for one or two questions. I yell out, Pete, you have to tell everybody about the thing. And he goes, is that Charles Rosenay? And he goes, "Oh no! All right, here we go." And he tells the story.
It's a very unique story, but unfortunately, it takes
Gonna-
a while to tell the full story.
This will make you happy, and it's by pure coincidence or circumstance. I have this here. Pete Best to Rose with love, Horst Fasher, and what does he write? I can't see it backwards.
It
I
says,
love
I love
you.
you too, Rose.
I love you too, Rose. Pete
Yeah.
Best. And that was what year was this? That was they were both special guests at this convention, 1987. And a friend forever, I don't even know who wrote on the cover. I love you too. Someone even autographed the cover, and I have no idea who it is. So that was crazy that the two of them were at the same show. Anyway, I just happen to have this here. I don't know why. I'm going through old stuff and seeing what autographs and what cool things I had handy.
And
Who
for
else?
those of you that don't know, Rose is Charles's mom.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry, right.
Yeah.
God,
So,
so me.
yeah, Pete, what a sweetheart. And if you ever bought the book Beetle, the Pete Best story, he tells you the whole story of the thing, which I've interviewed him once or twice where he brings it up.
Yeah,
It's such a unique story that you will only hear from him.
yeah.
The other Beatles will never bring it up. I don't know if they'd ever want to bring it up.
Well, yeah,
Let's just say it was a collaboration between all the Beatles.
Yes, it was a collaboration. Paul mentioned Pete Best, in a few interviews recently, and I was pleased and surprised. Why not? Why not just get together one time for a beer? I would love to see that while they're still on this planet. Maybe
Yeah.
not Ringo, maybe not Ringo. One took the other's place. There was hard feelings and all that. But Paul and him were mates. They should I wish they would get together at some point.
I have a feeling that might hurt Ringo's feelings, and that's why Paul wouldn't do it. But it would be very interesting just for him to open up, even in one concert with Paul.
I once pitched David Fishoff, who was Ringo's
Yeah.
manager, right? Produced all his tours in the early days. I said, "Hey, I got a good idea," because there were a few shows that weren't sold out. It was a Detroit show. Ringo was the shows weren't selling out in the middle somewhere. I said, "Hey, why don't I get Pete Best's band to be an opening act? You know what kind of press that would get?" And Ringo shouldn't care because he blows it away. It's just they'll sound like this bar band.
Uh-huh.
Are you out of your effing mind? Ringo would never allow that.
Uh,
I tried. Sorry, Pete. I did try. And
and
I don't know if Pete would have done it. Pete probably would have. There's no one cooler than Pete. And you know what? I remember when I introduced, I don't know if you made it happen or Tom Frangione, or I don't remember who made it happen. Andy White and Pete Best on stage. You know, the,
that must have been Tom.
oh yeah.
Well,
Um,
it wasn't me.
I was at one of the conventions, and they would never have met had it not been for that. And that was so I'm proud of those historic moments. The Pete with Horst together, Pete with Andy White together. Really, really good memories. Did I put a few others on my hit list who I have?
Yeah, but I
Uh,
just wanted to say you and I were both a few weeks ago at one of Pete's last concerts, the one in Rhode Island. You had emceed it, and I had no idea he was going to make the announcement shortly after that he was done
done.
with public performing. Obviously he's on in years.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad, but I wish he would just, you know what he should do? He should just perform at the Casbah. And anytime somebody wants to see him,
Hmm.
that would be if you make it a Beatle trip to England, that's
Yeah.
the only place. So he doesn't have to travel anywhere.
Yeah.
He could just do it at home.
So I think, and I'm just speculating because we haven't talked about it. I think the travel isn't what it is. I think the meeting fans afterwards isn't what it is. I think what it is when Ringo does a concert, he's on stage singing a few songs, right? He's drumming a few songs. He's off stage some of the show. When Pete Best
Oh,
is
I
doing
saw it.
that,
Yeah.
Pete Best is doing a whole concert. He's next to Rogue drumming the entire time, you know, and he's not doing it a whole year round. He's not staying his chops. So it probably tired him out. He did 4 shows in a
Yep.
short time in Rhode Island. Then went on a cruise and did it. And, he's in his 80s. I think that it took its toll. And he said, took too much out of me. I don't think I want to do this live stuff anymore. That's
Hmm.
my speculation on it. And I get it. And he has every right to. I
Sure.
hope I hope he'll still, when I bring a group to the Casbah in August or in future years, I hope he'll still come out and sit at a table, meet people, maybe sit in on a song or two. And I would hope that he'll still be up for that. I just think when he says he's retiring, I think it means from touring, doing concerts. That's what I think.
Okay. We shall see. All right. I know that you mentioned Eddie Deason, who was
Who's
just at the Fest for Beatle fans, by the
he
way.
was. He's never been to any of my conventions.
Yeah.
In the early days, I always would say, "Hey Eddie, I want you to come to a convention. Come to England with me." And in those days, I'm not going to fly. He wouldn't fly. He didn't want to fly. Unfortunately, he got over that, so he does a lot of autograph shows. I mention him because he's us, Ken. He's you and me. He's the biggest Beatle fan on the planet, and he's the biggest Monkees fan. And you throw out a pop culture reference, he's got it. And the people that you and I grew up loving, Jerry Lewis, the Beatles,
Uh-huh.
Eddie Deason. And so, and I've interviewed him, and he's given me chapters in books, and I consider him a friend. So anyone I consider a friend, I gotta include in that list. But he's never done one of my conventions, as crazy as that is. And Eddie and I go way back. And I gotta mention him for another reason. It's one of my favorite movies of all time.
I
People
want to
say,
hold your hand.
"What's your favorite Beatles movie?" Well, it's too easy to say Help or Hard Day's Night, So I'll say, I want to hold your hand. They go, really? I go, well, not really, but I do love it. I'll put that on, as a trifecta. If I'm showing the kids and I want to get them back into the Beatles mode, it's Hard Day's Night, followed by Help, followed by I Want to Hold Your Hand.
So he's very much like the character that he played in the movie.
There couldn't have been a better casting than that. And it was a dream role for him too. Ringo Klaus, that was it. It was Eddie Deason, same person.
Yeah. And talk about Jerry Lewis. I mean, the first time I saw that movie, that's what entered my mind. He's being Jerry Lewis.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder, did he ever meet Jerry Lewis?
Oh, I he wrote on his Facebook. I think he did. What's Jerry Lewis's? Can I have a book coming out? I don't want to talk about it yet. But what's Jerry Lewis is in the book? What's his Beatles connection?
There's a few.
What's the main
He
one?
did he was well, Ringo was on the telethon in 79. John and Yoko and Elephant's Memory were on the telethon in 72. Well, 72 it must have been. And didn't Jerry sing Give Peace a Chance with them?
Oh, so I was going by the telethon with John and Yoko because he came out with a kazoo or with a silly instrument.
Okay.
So he actually performed with Lennon, you see. So yeah, they're on the telephone, but that's the bigger catch. He actually performed on stage with them. So there you go. Do you know what the book I'm talking about? Don't say if you
Yes,
do.
but we're not supposed to say anything about it.
We won't say yet. Not yet.
Okay. Maybe we'll break the news on my channel here.
We will. We will. I'm getting there, about halfway done with the book, so that's exciting.
Okay. All
I
right. Any other people you want
I can say no more. What's that from?
to
I, I can say no more.
please
Eleanor.
say no more?
Yeah, say no more.
Which is also the name of a Badfinger album.
And I'm glad you got to talk to Bob Jackson. Wasn't he a great guy?
Fantastic. I
Yeah.
didn't know what to expect. And boy, did I get my history wrong because I thought that he was asked to join Badfinger, I thought, to replace Joey Molland, but it was really to replace Pete Ham, who had left
Yeah.
for a few weeks and then came back.
Well,
But, it's great to hear all that history and what a period of turmoil then in 74 and 75, especially with Pete taking his life and everything. But what a great album.
in this book, the book of top 10 Beatles lists,
Yeah.
four Badfinger chapters. Bob Jackson,
Yep.
Joey
Joey,
Molland. Who else? I'll give you a hint. Ivy's,
Ron Griffiths.
Ron Griffiths, and one more. He's the musical director for Peter Asher, and he toured with Badfinger.
Yeah, the keyboard player.
Jeffrey Allen Ross.
Right.
Jeff's a really good guy, real sweetheart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I saw him with them at some point touring in Connecticut when 20 people would show up in the 70s or whatever, or the 80s. And it was a club in Wallingford or something, Shahrazad. I don't even remember. And it was just like one guy I knew the name of, and it was Tommy Evans, and I didn't know who the other guys were. And now, in retrospect and doing history and looking through Badfinger
Yeah.
concert shows and all those, Jeff Allen Ross fits in, all these people, plug the gap. But the first time I had Joey Molland, that was really special because he did the convention,
Yeah.
interviewed, and then we had a separate venue where he did an actual concert. There was I think called the Landmark Club or something like that in Stamford, Connecticut. And so, people who were Badfinger followers and fanatics who, had never seen any of the guys solo. And Joey was, carrying the torch with Mike Gibbons. Gibbons was
Yeah.
still alive at the time.
Right.
That was a real coup having him, and we'd stayed in touch forever. Joey, of all the people we've mentioned here, Joey and I would be the ones who we call it just to say hello and how's it going and what's new and what are you working on. There's not a lot of people. There's all these other people at a convention. We were buddies. We were best friends. On
Right.
a tour, we'd see each other. It was great. But Joey and Davy Jones was another one. We would just say hello just for any
Right.
random reason, get on the phone and talk to each other, and that was pretty cool. I miss Joey. I
Yes.
miss Joey very much. That's a
Me
sad.
too. There's certain people going back to my work in the 80s when I started doing my Beatles radio show, my friendship started with a lot of people.
Yes,
Back then, Joey Molland being one of them, Steve Holly,
sure.
there's a lot of people. Gary from Elephant's Memory. It all started in the 80s and we kept in touch. And Joey was always so nice to me. They all were.
Mm,
Wings guys, they've all been great to me, every member of Wings that I've interviewed.
sure.
And yeah, Gary and Adam, both from
When are we
Elephant.
gonna when are we gonna see your book of interviews? When's that coming out? You have about
I don't
5 dollars.
know.
You need
I
about
need to
four.
take a year off from all my podcasts to work on this. You
Mm,
know, it never ends, you know. But I'm always thinking about the new thing, Charles. I'm not thinking about the past.
good answer. Touche.
Uh-huh.
On that
Oh,
note,
we got to get going. So again, folks, the Fab Four Music Festival, May 17th at
at Dudleytown Brewing Company, Windsor, Connecticut, $10. Just come, get your tickets in advance. www.fab4musicfestival.com. I'll be there. Hopefully, Ken will be there. All the Beatle people, and we'll have a great day out. A day of good day sunshine where it's guaranteed to raise a smile.
I'm going to try and make it, but I will tell you that that very same weekend there's a meet and greet on
Don't
from
tell me.
WFDU.
Yeah.
No, 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 it's not the same day.
Oh,
It's not the same day.
oh,
But one of the stations that carries every little thing, my radio show, is WFDU in New Jersey,
yeah.
and they're doing a meet and greet with all the fans of the radio station. So
Oh, that's cool.
it's the same weekend, and I'm gonna hopefully try and meet some of the people who listen to my radio show on that
Awesome.
radio station.
Oh, that's a good event. Yeah.
Okay. So if I can, because it's a busy weekend, I'll try to be there for the Fab Four Music Festival. Because apart from enjoying the emceeing, I love seeing these bands.
Yeah.
You know, I could just sit in the front row there all day. I probably prefer that sometimes than being on stage,
Well,
unlike you.
yeah. Being on stage. Ken, thank you so much. Our history goes back and you're so close. And thank God, we were together and your wife was on the same event, or, who knows, right?
Yeah,
It was all meant to be. It's part of thanks to the Beatles, so many great things.
I think about apart from all the music, all the friends I've made, and it's pretty amazing. I'm
Yes.
so blessed that way. Anyway, and all the people who watch this program and this
Yeah,
channel. Thank you all so much for doing that. And I always say, please subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Charles, we'll talk to you soon,
I look forward.
and
Thank you.
take care. Thanks everyone for watching.